For today's lesson, we are going to be drawing mouths. So we're going to do a closed and open one. Please get out your sketchbooks and any drawing supplies. So today we're going to use graphite. Get out an eraser or erasers, pencil sharpener, and any blending supplies. You're going to label the top mouths and add the date as well. So we're going to be looking at a closed mouth first and how to shade that, and then we're going to move to an open mouth where you can see the teeth. Now the mouth is really interesting because like the eye, it can open and close, but the mouth has a lot more variety with the shapes that it makes. So let's go over the anatomy terms for the mouth. Anatomically, in the skull, what really helps make up the mouth, aside from the teeth, are the upper jaw and the lower jaw. So please write down that the upper jaw is called the maxilla, and the lower jaw is the mandible, which you'll see here. So the maxilla, the upper jaw, is connected to things like your cheekbone, and then there's that TMJ, that joint that connects the bottom jaw to the top one. So when you're talking, you can kind of feel that is what's moving, and if you dislocate your jaw, usually that's what's been, moved off. Okay, so I wanted to go over some areas that go wrong when we tend to draw mouths. So over here you have a sample on the left of a not so great mouth that's been exaggerated. So I wanted to ask what areas on this look like they aren't so great. Here are some of the things that I think tend to go wrong. So one of them is the harsh outlines around the border of the lips. Next is the limited shading on the skin. The center line, some people like to make way too simple, like if they're smiling, it's a curve. If they're frowning, it's a downwards curve. There's flat shading, and then there's very unnatural, almost eyelash-like details to the mouth. So we're going to try to avoid all of these problems and get the most natural-looking mouth as possible. So even though we haven't really talked about it insofar as the other parts of the face, like the eyes or the nose, we do want to break the mouth down a little bit more in proportion, just so you can get the hang of that. So remember that proportion is comparing sizes, so you can randomly guess how long to make this mouth. You can make it kind of wider, or you can make it kind of shorter. But in order to get this as accurate as we can do some proportions. It's a little bit easier technically when this is on a face because you have other things to compare it to. Some people don't know how wide to make the mouth, so they compare it to how wide the eyes are and matching that up. That looks scary. But when it's a mouth sitting on its own, we're going to break it down in kind of a different fashion. So the top lip we're going to treat kind of like a circle. And this time our lips are symmetrical, so we're going to break them in half. In order to decide where the sides are, we use that same circle to measure things out. So you see this is about like 2.5 circles wide. Same on the other side, you should see about 2.5 circles wide. So this might be reminiscent of how we did our bottle. We're going to start with a circle, cut this in half, go 1, 2.5. This ends about there. 1, 2.5 ends about there. And I only really use those initial marks to help me figure out how wide the mouth should be. So now I know. So I can make this kind of cross section and get rid of those from being too tall. So now I know how wide I want my mouth to be. Now we should figure out the bottom lip as compared to the top lip. So I'm going to get rid of those extra lines over there. And so the bottom lip is definitely wider than the top lip, just a little bit though. So making sure I have just a little bit more of that bottom lip than I do at the top. Notice that when I'm sketching, I'm doing all these things lightly. And since I'm using Procreate and I'm using an online tablet, it's a lot easier for me to erase. But if I was using a pencil, I'd still be drawing really lightly so that my erasing is easier. So for the top lip, we represent that with this like simple circle or slight oval shape. The bottom, and this surprises most people, we also use ovals for, but depending on the size, a little bit bigger, and they're going to overlap these two ovals right here. And that's because the lips are kind of round, so you can feel if you touch your mouth that the center of your mouth gets a little bit thicker than the edges of it. And so that roundness is going to help us mimic the volume that happens at the front of our mouth as opposed to the sides of it. All right. Next thing we're going to approach is drawing the outside of the top and the bottom lips. And so we're going to start with this area here, this little V section, which is called the Cupid's bow. Some people have a very pointy, pronounced Cupid's bow. Some people have a rounder one. And some people's just kind of even out and it's like they don't have one. And that connects it to the nose. So if we look at this picture here, we have this shallow kind of wide V, doesn't go very far. Like that. And then instead of going flat and connecting to our corner, we're going to round it just a tiny bit up and then go down into those corners. So just a slightly curved line as opposed to a strict straight one, and into those corners there. Now we can do the same for the bottom. Bottom tends to be a little bit easier. So it's a little flatter around here, so I go around those two ovals that I initially made, and then just shy of the corner, I connect them in. And so the picture that I'm looking at is pretty symmetrical, but you won't always see that. So really look at what is in front of you. Next, we're going to get that middle. So as I said earlier, one of the mistakes people make is giving a straight kind of center line in between the lips, or oversimplifying. She's not really smiling. There's a slight curve to her lips, but you wouldn't say that she has this perfect stretched out U shape either. If you can see, this really curves up and down like that. So those initial circles and ovals that we made are going to help us with that. So try to go under that first oval, over the other two, and then there's just a slight dip that happens at those corners. And now we have a really good base for our lips that we're going to start shading. Again, one of the problems I see is that people, once they have this outline, will go over it really dark because they really want me to know this is the lips, they got it, they got the shape right. But instead of doing that, we're going to do the opposite, and we're going to lighten out everything. So we don't really want any harsh outlines at all. So even though I'm very proud of the lines that we made and the proportions that we've got. I want to lighten out basically all of that, except for that center because that is dark. If you made it a little thick though, then you might want to lighten it and go over it again a little bit thinner. But that's up to you. Okay, so as usual, we want to give everything a rough mid-tone. And we want to avoid the highlight areas. So that's really going to be over here. And even though it's a bunch of tiny spots, I'm going to treat it like a bigger spot for now. Make my way around it. And fill everything else kind of lightly. Now, as I said before, you can just draw the actual lips themselves, but I like to put it in context and give a little bit of skin around there. And because I'm not doing an outline, I want to treat the skin like a gray kind of value. So some of it's going to be lighter and I'm going to leave it alone, like around this cupid's bow right here. I'll avoid this area. Some of it's going to be darker and I'll indicate that a little bit later. So I know that if I turn this photo black and white, which might help you in the future, this all would be a little bit darker. But then there's some areas around the skin that I also want to indicate as having some shadow also. So I'm going to go over and around the lips that I just added value to and surround them with a lighter value. And at any point I can start darkening that if I want to. If you want to save this for the end, you can definitely save this for the end. I like to just do it when I feel like it and remind myself to do it. Okay, lips are popping. So let's get more into the detail on this and let's find some darker areas that we really want to emphasize. So right here where the lips are meeting and going into the top, you kind of see this dark area. So I'm going to go over that and then under as well, right where they meet, the top lip kind of casts a shadow on the bottom lip. So I'll work on those areas that I think are especially dark and try to get under here as well. I might start dealing with the shadow that's right under there to push it out. So there's a lot of dark areas to work with. So let's start right under the mouth and right here. Then the top lip. And just like when we did eyelashes, all those lines that we have are nice details that we don't really need to add in until later. Notice I'm trying to get how uneven that shading is, as opposed to just going straight through like that. While I'm here, I might darken out everything just a little bit so they stand out some more. Really focus on the corners and how dark those corners get though. Alright, at this point, I'm going to try to get around my highlight and shape it out a little bit more. So really adding in these details so that they look more even. And making that shape more defined. Now, like I said, I'm going to add that shadow that I see going under. And by doing that, I really pop out the bottom lip more. So that contrast really helps push it out. So it looks like it sticks out because it creates that shadow right under. You can even feel under your lip there's kind of a dip there. And because the light tends to come from above you, your mouth casts a shadow on your face like that. Also get in the corners. There's just the barest hint of these round kind of edges there. So I'll work on rounding those out. I don't want to make them stick out too much because then it'll look like she's smiling more, which she doesn't really look like she's doing in the photo. If you're working from a photo where they are smiling, then you might see a little bit more push on the sides like that. And that's because your lips move so much they stretch out your skin. So when you smile and stretch your lips, it pushes your skin back a little bit. When your mouth is more relaxed like this, you're not going to see those lines. Alright, so this is really just shading, just like with the nose. Lots and lots of shading. Define the top areas a little bit better. And now I can start to add more of those details. So I have a good base for my regular shading. Now I'm going to start to add those lines. Like I said before, I don't want you to add all these dark lines the same way that people add eyelashes to eyes before I taught you how to do those. So really lightly, and usually I recommend sharpening your pencil for this point. You want to add in those lines. And since you're working with a piece of paper and a pencil, you can also run your fingers back and forth, even better if you have a blending stick. And you can work on blending those lines in so they don't look so harsh. So finish any last minute details, look at areas that should be really bright and take your eraser to them, look for areas that look too outliney and make sure that they're blended. And finally, you're also going to look for all the shadowed areas. And once you feel pretty good, then you should be ready to go. And then the next step after this is to do an open mouth. Alright everyone, now we are going to look at an open mouth as compared to a closed mouth. So before we were really just looking at the lips and the shading, and now we're adding teeth. And depending on how open a person's mouth is, you'll be able to see more or less of what you see here. So once again, every person and pose and situation is going to be different. But I did want to show you some things that tend to go wrong when we draw open mouths, like the one you see in the photo above. So below that, I have a sample of what tends to go wrong with people who are drawing mouths open for the first time. So what are some things that you notice about this mouth as compared to the mouth next to it that look a little bit off? Here are some of the things that I think are pretty common when we're trying to draw mouths, but happen kind of incorrectly. So the four main things are the Cupid's bow not being very realistic, the teeth being completely white. It's kind of like the white of your eyes, like the sclera part shouldn't be completely white. There is the outline around each tooth that's not really going to look natural. And then finally, there's an oversimplified shape. So you kind of see where the mouth is open, it looks like a slice of a watermelon, but it'll be a lot more curved than that and more natural looking. So today we are going to do our best to draw this open mouth smile, and I will give you tips on how to accomplish that. For this, of course, we want to make sure that we have our pencils kind of set up. And try to pick something that's light, so I will use my HB pencil. And let's kind of do this quickly. When we did an open mouth, the first thing that we did was we tried to figure out the proportions of it, especially when we're not looking at a full face. So we can do the same for this guy here. So for this, we represent the top bit of the lip with an oval or a circle. I like to do an oval. This one's kind of a little bit squished, so when you stretch your mouth into a smile, we kind of squish what would be a circle naturally. And then once I cut it in half, we want to figure out how many of these can fit in. So about 1, 2, about 3 in addition on the left, and 1, 2, 3 on the right. So let's start by drawing that. So in the middle we have kind of a squished oval. If I take that, cut it in half, I'll add 1, 2, 3. On the right, 1, 2, 3 on the left. And that's how wide my whole mouth is going to be. Once I have that measurement, I can get rid of all those ovals in there. All right, now we need to get how wide this is. Now because our mouth is open and showing the teeth part of this, we also need to figure out the distance from here to the lip, and then the lip to the bottom of the mouth. So I'll still continue to use ovals for that. So this is about 1, little less than 2 is where the bottom of the lip is, and then right there is the total bottom of the mouth. Okay. So about 1 at 2 measurements, cut that about there, and that's going to be where the bottom lip starts. Add 1 more oval in there, and that's where that bottom lip is. So add 1, 2, cut, add another one, and that's the bottom lip. Once again, I can erase things. So from here to here, that's going to be where the mouth is open. From here to here, that's going to be that bottom lip. And if you recall, the bottom lip is comprised essentially out of 2 oval shapes that are overlapping. So here and here, you can almost feel like there's a fold right through the center of your mouth. So now I will draw those overlapping ovals fitting within that bottom lip space. Okay. So a lot of this is similar. It's just really when we get to the teeth that's going to be pretty different. So now we're going to get the shape of the mouth. We'll start out with the Cupid's bow at the top. This person has a Cupid's bow that's again being stretched out, so it looks nice and kind of round like this, stretching pretty far. And then from that point, it's going to reach down with a slight curve into the corners of our mouth. So we'll go and give them that kind of round Cupid's bow in the middle there. And then reach around to the corners of our mouth. So we want to compare how our lip is related to that corner. So if I draw a line like this, you can see that the corners happen about like halfway through my oval. So about halfway of my oval's here. This is where the corners of the mouth are. So slight curve down into the corners on both sides. Then we're going to get the lower part of the top lip. And that's gonna curve up and up like this. So right at the corners, it kind of hooks back. So we're gonna go around that oval that we had, and then up, and then it'll kind of hook back down. And that gives that top lip that kind of fullness that happens in the center. Okay, time to do the bottom lip, and that's going to curve upwards into our corners. So up into the corner. And on the bottom, we're going to go below those two ovals that we had. And again, up into the corners. Okay. So now we have the outside of our mouth, and just like before, we don't really want to have a harsh outline there. So I'm going to take my erasers. First, I'm going to get rid of kind of these measurement lines that I had. So get rid of the ovals now that they've helped me kind of achieve the roundness that I wanted. I'm going to go around the corners, get rid of those lines, and then I'm going to really lighten out everything. Now if I want to, I can already shade the lips, but I think I'll draw in the teeth first. So again, one of the biggest mistakes I see is people will outline the teeth very harshly and give them these really even shapes like this. And that's not necessarily the worst thing to do. They'll also like cut off all the teeth kind of straight. Ugh, man, that's horrifying. So what you want to do instead is you want to make sure that you draw in your teeth very lightly. I don't like to harshly outline anything except for the gum areas. So you see those gums and kind of like the bottom of the mouth where you can see the tongue kind of poking through. Those are the parts that are dark enough that you can outline them, but not the between the teeth themselves, because the teeth, you want them to kind of look nice. You don't want them to look like they have any gunk in between them. So as I'm drawing this, let me grab that and erase this out. As I'm drawing that, I want to pay attention to that. Not everyone's going to have perfectly symmetrical teeth. Like this person, for example, if I cut their lips right in half, you can see that the middle of their teeth don't exactly hit right in the center. So we want to be careful of that. So I'm going to go over my drawing too. if I cut down the center and just keep that, I can already kind of place that first tooth here. And I'll sketch that in really lightly. So see how it gets interrupted kind of at the top area and then goes around. For teeth, it's a pretty good idea to count how many you can actually see. So let's start with the center and go towards the right. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and kind of that 6th one in the back. So with teeth, they tend to get smaller towards the side. That 3rd one you can see is kind of a different pointier shape. So you want to be aware of that as well. So I have the first tooth, lightly sketching in the 2nd one. Be aware of how it touches the top of the mouth and kind of gets cut off by the bottom. The 3rd one has like a slant to it going down. Again, is almost going to touch the top lip, but not really. It gets cut off by the bottom. So that's 3. Next one also has a little slant. That's 4. Next, goes a little lower, 5. There's that slant. And then my 6th one kind of reaches up towards the top more. And that one's really dark, so eventually I won't be able to see that. After that 6th tooth, you can see that the rest of that's kind of dark, so I can actually start to shade that and get the shading that's happening in there. So there's like a little bit of a curve before it turns out like this. Okay, so there's that side. Notice how lightly, absolutely lightly, I have shaded that in or drawn that in, and then I can shade the top of it if I want to. So I can get in and I can shade kind of the gum area between the teeth and make any adjustments that you need to. So that part's fine. Okay. On the bottom, I also have some little corners showing, so I can start to fill those in as well. Let's do the same to the left side. So on the left side, we'll go, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can see the tiniest little bit of the 6th tooth there, but it's pretty hard for me to see. So I'll focus on the first 5 really. So again, get how the first tooth is kind of touching the lip and how that's related. Gets cut off at the bottom, and there's this like tiny little curve right under it right there that's really dark. So there's tooth 1. And then tooth 2, 3. Notice how they're not even like this, but they kind of angle a little bit more like that. So you're going to get those angles. So 3 gets cut off, and there's just a little bit of the bottom of the mouth showing. Get the 4th tooth. It's starting to get skinnier and skinnier as we go back. 5th tooth, and then just the barest hints that I can see the 6th one. And again, we'll get in those details that I can see. So now I'll shade in there. And that 6th tooth is pretty dark, so I'm just going to pre-shade it so that I don't forget. I don't want it to be super light. Same thing, I can start shading the gums at the top and the bottom. Okay. Alrighty. So now I have my teeth kind of shaded. I actually like to take my eraser and lightly go over where the lines between them are. To make teeth look really bright, you want to avoid the outlines being really dark around them. So that's probably the most important thing when you're doing closed or open mouths, is that the teeth aren't outlined. Then we can treat this like before, so we can start shading and avoiding any highlighted areas. I'll save the shading the teeth for a little bit later. So I'm going to get in the actual lips and around the mouth, so let's make the whole of the lips a little bit darker. Notice how the top lip casts a little bit of a shadow actually on the teeth, so we'll get a little bit of shading just in there, just barely. It's mostly for the gums. Then we'll get the bottom lip, and again I'm going to avoid kind of that highlighted area at the bottom. If anything gets too dark, I'll take my eraser to it. So we don't want to harshly make an outline around our highlight, but we just want to go around it as natural as possible. And once we have that, we also want to get in the skin part. So let's go above the Cupid's bow. You want to get that there's that dark area that connects it to the nose. That's called the philtrum. It's kind of highlighted, so I'm going to avoid the highlighted areas and go around my mouth over there. Let's get in those corners and how kind of dark they are as they fold. There's just a little bit of indication that the skin is curling or curving around there as the mouth pushes the skin upwards. And I really want to surround the mouth with this. So left and right, so go on the right side, add that little curve. Alright, and the lips are going to be darker than the skin in most places, but underneath you do want to get that little bit of extra dark kind of cast shadow that your lips put onto your skin right below. Okay, we'll just add any areas that are extra dark in the lips, especially around the corners, kind of fades towards the center to push the center outward, similarly to your nose, right? So we had like a left and the right side were kind of darker than the center, and that made it look like the tip of your nose was darker. So same thing with your mouth, and you want to add in those tiny little details, those lines and all of that, super lightly, and even like blend them in. And you want to get around your teeth, whatever is really dark around there, to make them stick out the most. So I've mostly shaded my mouth now. I'll probably go back in a little bit to make that look even better, but we do want to get the teeth shaded a little bit. So towards the edges of the mouth, you'll see that the teeth get a little bit darker. So this tooth, this one's very dark, this one, and this one extra, extra dark. So we really want to get that sense that as the mouth is kind of curving away from us, those teeth get a lot darker because they're going further from us. They are going to have some shading to them though, so you don't want to just fill them in and make them super dark without getting like the fact that they also have highlights and they also have midtones and core shadows. So starting on the left side, we'll make that first tooth pretty dark, kind of fades away. Second one, I'll leave a little bit of room for a highlight. And then by the third one, I can start really lightening up. So we don't want to have our front teeth really dark. We want those ones to look kind of nice and shiny. I'm gonna focus on the gums around those teeth though, to really make them kind of pop out. Okay. So back teeth now on the right side. Again, we're gonna go kind of around them, make sure that they're surrounded by darkness to pop them out. But then right where they meet, they're kind of dark and then they'll fade away. That third one we want kind of bright. And again, we're gonna kind of exaggerate how bright these teeth are. The bottom's gonna have a tiny bit of shading to them, but the centers of them we want to be pretty light. Okay, and now I can go back in the lips and add some more line details, since I'm not too concerned that I'm going to be blurring them as I do the details of the teeth. So that is essentially how I want you to approach doing an open mouth. Sometimes you're going to see other parts of the mouth included, so you might see like someone's tongue kind of poking out, you might see kind of the back or more of their gums. Really just depends on how wide your person smiles and like what their anatomy is like. So there we go. Now if anything got too dark, again, you always want to make sure that you go back in and lighten it with your eraser. If anything could be pushed a little bit darker or needs to stand out more, then you're going to make sure that you do that as well. So now that we have that, I think we are ready to do a little bit of labeling. And there are a couple places on the mouth that I think are important for us to know. Okay, so on this mouth, these are the areas that I think are important for us. So we have up at the top what's called the philtrum, and that's going to be that part of your skin kind of connecting between your nose and your mouth, so right above the cupid's bow and under the nose. Then in orange you have your cupid's bow, which is that center dip of the mouth. We have the corners, which are called the commissures. And then finally, the red part of your lip is known as the vermilion border. So the red part versus the skin part, there's no outline, but it definitely looks like redder or has a different kind of color to it. and vermilion is a type of red. So the vermilion border is the border around your mouth that separates it and looks different from the rest of your skin. So at this point, you should have a good understanding of how the mouths work. Same kind of anatomy as on a closed mouth. And you are going to now practice on your own.